December 18, 1944. Camp Custer, Michigan. Hans Keller sat frozen before a discarded American newspaper, staring at a photograph that shouldn't have been possible. Row after row of B-24 Liberator bombers stretched into the distance like steel birds awaiting migration. The caption read, "Willow Run, one bomber every 63 minutes." His hands trembled. In Bremen, his Luftwaffe unit had spent weeks repairing a single Heinkel. Here, America built complete bombers faster than he could eat breakfast. The hollow sensation spreading through his chest wasn't fear, it was recognition. Germany had already lost this war, and the defeat hadn't happened on any battlefield. Before we continue, if you're finding value in these untold stories of World War II, please hit that like button and subscribe to join our community of history seekers, and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, whether you're in Berlin or Boston, Tokyo or Toronto. We'd love to know you're part of this journey. Your support helps us bring these forgotten voices back to life. Now, let's return to that cold Michigan barracks where German prisoners were discovering a truth more devastating than any artillery barrage. The iron stove hissed and popped, its feeble warmth barely reaching the wooden bunks where 30 German prisoners huddled in wool blankets. Outside, December snow fell in silent curtains, muffling the world beyond the barbed wire. These men were soldiers without battles, warriors whose war had ended not with surrender but with capture, plucked from the chaos of Normandy, the Ardennes, the collapsing Western Front. They had too much time now. Time to think. Time to remember. Time to realize. Keller passed the newspaper to Corporal Vogler, whose face drained of color as he studied the same photograph. "Impossible," Vogler whispered. "This must be propaganda." But the camp commandant, Major Stevens, a friendly Texan who spoke broken German, had been bringing them American magazines for weeks. Life, Time, Popular Mechanics. Each one told the same story in numbers and photographs that couldn't be faked. Stevens walked through the barracks that afternoon carrying another bundle of magazines. "Reading material, fellas," he said, dropping them on the table. "Thought you boys might want to see what's happening back home." By home, he meant America. The prisoners no longer had a home to speak of. Keller opened a Life magazine dated November 1944. The cover showed a woman in a red bandana, riveting metal panels onto a bomber wing. Rosie the Riveter, the symbol of American wartime production. Inside, the images seemed borrowed from science fiction. Conveyor belts stretching for miles. Women and elderly men working side by side with arc welders throwing showers of sparks. Row after row of identical engines waiting to be mounted into aircraft fuselages. And everywhere, the same mechanical rhythm, the pulse of industry operating without pause. "They build more in 1 week than we do in a month," Vogler said, his voice flat with disbelief. Another prisoner, a former factory foreman from Essen, added quietly, "And their cities aren't even bombed." That observation landed like a stone in still water. The Americans were producing this torrent of war material while their factories stood untouched. Their workers slept in their own beds. Their children played in parks that hadn't been reduced to rubble. Germany's industrial cities, Cologne, Hamburg, Dresden, Berlin, were being systematically erased from the earth. Yet here was America, thriving. Outside, the faint whistle of a train echoed through the cold morning air. The prisoners had learned to recognize that sound. The Victory Special, locals called it. Supply trains bound for the coasts, carrying spare parts, engines, rations, fuel, ammunition. They ran on schedules more precise than anything the Wehrmacht had managed even in peacetime. 1 train every hour, like clockwork, each one carrying enough material to supply an entire division. Keller watched through the frosted window as the train disappeared into the gray horizon. Beyond the camp fence, the smokestacks of a nearby auto plant rose like towers of steel, exhaling white vapor into the winter sky. For the first time since his capture, Keller understood something that had haunted him since Stalingrad, since Kursk, since the skies over Germany had filled with endless waves of Allied bombers. They hadn't been defeated by better soldiers. They had been buried under an avalanche of machines. While German cities burned and Europe starved, America's assembly lines sang day and night. The real front line of this war wasn't in Normandy or the Ardennes. It was in Detroit, Chicago, Pittsburgh, where rivers of steel and oceans of gasoline decided the fate of empires. Before their capture, most German soldiers had carried a clear image of America: lazy, undisciplined, soft. Nazi propaganda had painted the United States as a land of decadence where jazz music, chewing gum, and movie theaters had replaced the spirit of struggle. In training camps and on the Eastern Front, officers told them Americans couldn't endure hardship, that they relied on machines because they feared real sacrifice. The American soldier, they were told, was a factory worker in uniform, strong perhaps, but spiritually hollow. That illusion began to crumble the moment their transport ships reached American ports. When German POWs crossed the Atlantic in late 1943 and throughout 1944, they expected anger, humiliation, perhaps brutality. Instead, they witnessed something that defied every assumption. They arrived at ports lined with cranes and warehouses so vast that a single dockyard seemed larger than entire German industrial districts. Ships were unloaded not by exhausted laborers but by massive mechanical arms. Trains waited on parallel tracks, loading cargo without confusion or delay. Everything moved with choreographed precision. As their trains rolled inland through Pennsylvania, Ohio, Illinois, the prisoners stared through barred windows at an endless horizon of production. Factories with smokestacks glowing day and night, freight trains stretching to the horizon, highways lined with tankers and trucks moving in unbroken streams. At Camp Swift in Texas, a group of captured Wehrmacht officers stood in stunned silence as they watched American supply trucks arrive. Captain Otto Steiner, a logistics officer who had managed supply lines in North Africa, whispered to another prisoner, "They've turned labor into symphony. Every man plays his part, and the result is thunder." These men had been trained to believe that Germany was the world's industrial master, that Krupp steel and Bavarian engineering represented the pinnacle of modern civilization. Now they found themselves humbled. American factories weren't just vast, they were alive, breathing, operating with mechanical efficiency that bordered on the supernatural. Many POWs noticed another shocking detail. While Germany starved under rationing, Americans seemed to produce and consume without limits. Soldiers guarding the camps drank Coca-Cola from glass bottles, glass during wartime. Trucks delivered bread still warm from automated bakeries. Newspapers advertised new cars for civilian purchase even as the war raged across 2 oceans. Lieutenant Heinrich Bauer, a captured panzer officer, later wrote in his memoirs, "We thought we fought an army. In truth, we fought a civilization built upon endless supply." The myth of American softness died quietly behind barbed wire. These prisoners realized that what they had mocked as decadence was actually power disguised as comfort. The abundance of food, the speed of production, the precision of schedules, all of it formed part of a machine that Germany could never match. They began to grasp a truth that few soldiers ever see while war still rages. America didn't win because it fought harder. It won because it built harder, faster, smarter. Inside those quiet camps surrounded by Michigan snow or Texas heat, German POWs confronted a new kind of defeat. Not one measured in lost battles or captured territory, but in lost illusions. They had believed in German superiority. Now they saw American capacity. And capacity, they were learning, was the currency of modern war. Before the war began, few nations could match Germany's engineering prowess. The Reich's factories had produced some of the finest weapons in military history. The Panzer I-4 tank, the Messerschmitt Bf 109 fighter, the U-boat wolf packs that terrorized the Atlantic. These machines symbolized national genius, precision design, superior craftsmanship. But by 1942, the illusion of technological dominance was quietly collapsing under the weight of sheer numbers. Across the ocean, Franklin Roosevelt had declared America the arsenal of democracy. In 1940, while Europe burned, the United States began a transformation unprecedented in human history. Detroit's car plants stopped producing sedans and started producing tanks. Boeing built bombers instead of mail planes. Even Coca-Cola constructed bottling facilities at military bases worldwide to supply soldiers with a taste of home. Every American factory became a weapon of war. Ford's Willow Run plant outside Detroit was the beating heart of this revolution. It stretched 1 mile long, employed over 42,000 workers, most of them women, and operated around the clock in 3 shifts. Before the war, Ford had perfected the moving assembly line for automobiles. Now that same method was applied to warfare itself. Each day at Willow Run, workers installed 2,000 engines, riveted 20,000 aluminum plates, and shipped out a completed B-24 Liberator bomber every 63 minutes. In Pittsburgh, steel furnaces poured molten rivers day and night, rolling out armor plates for tanks and ships. In California, shipyards under Henry Kaiser's management produced Liberty ships, massive cargo vessels, so rapidly that one could be launched in just 4 days. In Illinois, Caterpillar produced tractors by the thousands, machines that would build runways in North Africa and haul artillery across France. The numbers told a story that no propaganda could obscure. By 1944, the United States was producing more aircraft, tanks, trucks, and ammunition than all Axis powers combined. Germany's total aircraft output that year reached approximately 40,000 planes. The U.S. built 96,000. For every Panzer tank rolling out of a German factory, 5 American Shermans were already en route to Europe or the Pacific. The logistics that powered this miracle were equally staggering. More than 35,000 miles of new rail lines were laid across America during the war. Every major city maintained warehouses filled with spare engines, tires, uniforms. The Army Quartermaster Corps distributed 24 million uniforms, 10 billion bullets, 17 million tons of food across multiple continents. And it wasn't just about scale. It was about design philosophy. While Germany relied on specialized handcrafted machinery, America standardized everything. Every bolt, every engine, every gear could be interchanged. A mechanic could fix a truck in Texas or Tunisia using identical parts. The U.S. didn't just build machines, it built systems. Meanwhile, in Germany, Allied bombers flattened factories, severed oil pipelines, destroyed transport networks. Hitler's obsession with wonder weapons, the V-2 rocket, the jet fighter, drained resources from practical production. Labor shortages worsened. Raw materials vanished. By the time Germany declared total war in 1943, America had already reached full industrial stride. To the German POWs studying American newspapers and production reports, it was a revelation. The war they had imagined as a clash of soldiers and tactics had become something else entirely, a test of civilization's ability to produce, organize, and adapt faster than the enemy could destroy. As one captured engineer wrote later, "In the end, it was not our courage that failed. It was our capacity." Germany had built weapons like an artist creates masterpieces. America had built weapons like a baker makes bread, efficiently, endlessly, without emotion. And in that difference lay the outcome of the war. For German prisoners who had once served in logistics, maintenance, or production back home, the statistics they discovered in camp libraries were more devastating than any weapon. They were numbers that made defeat mathematical, cold, absolute. At Ford's Willow Run, a new B-24 Liberator rolled off the assembly line every 63 minutes. That meant 24 bombers per day, over 700 per month, each one capable of carrying 5 tons of bombs across 3,000 miles. Germany, struggling under relentless Allied bombing, could barely complete that many aircraft in a week. In California, Kaiser shipyards launched Liberty ships at a pace that defied belief, 4 days from keel to sea. A vessel large enough to carry 3,000 jeeps or 7,000 tons of cargo. One German prisoner, formerly a shipbuilder from Kiel, shook his head in disbelief. 4 days, he whispered. It took us 4 months. Then came the ammunition figures. 41 billion rounds of small arms ammunition produced by the United States by 1945. Germany managed barely 12 billion. For every bullet fired by a German rifleman, 6 answered from the other side. By 1944, the United States was outproducing the entire Axis coalition by 6-1. The Reich built 29,000 tanks that year. America and her allies built 115,000. German industry delivered roughly 15,000 aircraft engines. American factories shipped over 60,000. The balance wasn't just tilted, it was annihilated. Fuel told another story of industrial supremacy. American oil production exceeded 180 million tons in 1944, while Germany's synthetic fuel plants struggled to produce 10 million. Without gasoline, even the best tank was a coffin. Without lubricants, even the finest airplane was useless. The human numbers told their own tale. 16 million Americans wore uniforms during the war, but 60 million worked in factories that supplied them. Housewives, farmhands, machinists, engineers, truck drivers, all part of a war machine that never slept. The German POWs saw evidence everywhere. Trucks arriving at camps carried food in crates stamped U.S. Army Quartermaster. Each wooden box was identical, every screw perfectly fitted. They saw waste, uneaten bread, discarded packaging, burned-out light bulbs quickly replaced. In Germany, such things were treasures. Here, they were background noise. Oberleutnant Erich Meyer wrote in his camp journal, "I used to think our army lost because of mistakes in command. But now I see the truth. We lost because we fought against infinity. We fought a country that could replace everything faster than we could destroy it." To the Americans, these statistics were patriotic proof of national power. To the prisoners, they were the obituary of an empire that had prided itself on discipline and perfection. The math was merciless. Every number told the same story. Germany had fought a war of men and ideals. America had fought a war of machines. And machines, unlike men, never tired, never starved, never despaired. The prisoners began using a new phrase among themselves, whispered half in awe, half in defeat. "Die Fabriken haben uns besiegt." The factories have beaten us. In the summer of 1945, several German prisoners held at Camp Huntsville in Texas were taken on an escorted work detail to a nearby industrial facility. Officially, their assignment was routine: unloading crates, cleaning scrap from a machine shop. In reality, it would become one of the most unforgettable days of their captivity. The factory was a subcontractor for North American Aviation, building parts for the P-51 Mustang, the very fighter that had escorted American bombers deep into the heart of Germany. For men who had once watched those sleek silver planes tear through the sky, the irony was unbearable. When the truck doors opened, the prisoners froze. Before them stretched a cavern of steel and light, a space larger than any structure they had ever seen. Conveyor belts clattered in mechanical rhythm. Cranes moved overhead like metal birds. Men and women worked in perfect synchronization, each motion practiced, efficient, automatic. Private Karl Adler, a mechanic from Bremen, would later recall, "I felt as if I had walked into the belly of some mechanical god." The sound was deafening. Pneumatic drills, power hammers, engines being tested on stands. Sparks flew like fireworks. Everything smelled of oil, aluminum, and motion. An American supervisor shouted over the noise, "Keep moving, fellas, watch your step." The prisoners were stunned, not by the command, but by who gave it. The supervisor was a woman in her 30s, wearing a denim jumpsuit and a red kerchief. In Germany, women were housewives, secretaries, nurses. Here they were building war machines. At one workstation, they saw a teenage girl riveting a wing panel beside a gray-haired man who could have been her grandfather. At another, a black worker guided a drill press, joking with a white foreman about baseball scores. To Germans raised in a society obsessed with hierarchy and racial purity, the scene was beyond comprehension. Adler whispered to his companion, "If Hitler could see this," and left the thought unfinished. They watched in disbelief as finished aircraft parts moved down the assembly line, emerging minutes later at the far end, stamped, polished, ready for shipment. Everything was standardized, precise, flowing. The entire factory seemed like a single organism breathing metal. During their midday break, guards handed them boxed lunches, sandwiches, fruit, bottles of Coca-Cola. The Americans ate casually, some on crates, others leaning against machines. The prisoners ate in silence, their eyes drifting toward a wall-sized production schedule showing output targets for the month. 250 wings, Adler counted softly, tracing the numbers with his finger. 250. In a month. He looked down at his sandwich, at the Coke fizzing in the bottle, and realized this wasn't a country straining under war. It was a country thriving because of it. On the ride back to camp, the truck was silent. The hum of the highway filled the void. Finally, one prisoner spoke. They build like they breathe. We were never going to win. Captain Karl Schultz, a former Luftwaffe pilot, wrote home after the war. It was the first time I saw what freedom truly means. It's not chaos. It's cooperation without fear. Evenings in camp brought new surprises. American guards allowed prisoners to organize orchestras, soccer teams, even theater groups. Some POWs painted murals on mess hall walls. Others built furniture for local churches. When Christmas came, townspeople donated trees, candles, gifts. In Camp Swift near Austin, prisoners performed a nativity play,